Millionaire can't negotiate. Janitor answers call in Arabic and closes $258 million deal. Richard Harrison wiped his face with a handkerchief for the fifth time that morning as the golden telephone on his mahogany desk rang insistently. The 52-year-old businessman had built an empire in New York City's real estate sector, but now faced the most important negotiation of his life, one that could save him from bankruptcy or bury him for good. On the other end of the line, Arab businessman Karim Al-Fayez was losing patience with the language barrier that had separated them for 3 days. The $258 million deal to build a commercial complex in downtown New York City was hanging by a thread, and Richard felt cold sweat running down his back as he tried to communicate in broken English with the investor from Kuwait. "Mr. Karim, please, I understand your concern," Richard stammered, holding the receiver with trembling hands. The angry voice of the Arab echoed through the speaker, a torrent of words in English mixed with Arabic that left the American businessman completely lost. Richard looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:15 in the morning, and he knew he had until noon to close the deal, or Karim would cancel everything and fly back to Kuwait City. Margaret Wilson watched the scene for the third time that week. The 58-year-old woman had worked as a janitor in the commercial building for 15 years and had witnessed many important meetings, but had never seen her boss so desperate. She pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway leading to the main office, pretending to be focused on her work, but actually worried about the man who, despite all his flaws, had always treated her with respect. The phone rang again, and this time, Richard answered with an even more tense voice. "Hello, Mr. Karim." Yes, I know." But the words came out jumbled, and Margaret could tell from his expression that things were not going well. Suddenly, Karim began speaking rapidly in Arabic, clearly frustrated with the situation. Richard froze, holding the phone away from his ear, not knowing what to do. It was at that moment that he noticed Margaret standing in the doorway, watching the situation with a concerned expression. "Margaret, I'm sorry. Can you come back later? I'm in a very important meeting," he said, trying to maintain his composure. But Karim kept speaking Arabic on the phone, his voice growing louder and more irritated. Margaret heard a few words that made her heart race. They were words she hadn't heard in over 20 years, but that still echoed in her memory as if it were yesterday. "Mr. Richard," she said hesitantly, "can I help?" Richard looked at her with a mixture of desperation and confusion. Karim was now speaking so fast that it seemed he was about to hang up. "Margaret, I don't know what he's saying. I think he's cancelling everything," whispered Richard, covering the phone's microphone. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing." Margaret took another step into the office, her heart pounding. She was sure of what she had just heard. Karim was complaining about the lack of professionalism and saying he would look for other partners in the United States. "Mr. Richard, excuse me, but I understand what he's saying," she said quietly. Richard turned to her with wide eyes. "What do you mean, Margaret?" "He's speaking Arabic. He said he's going to cancel the deal because he thinks you're not taking the negotiation seriously." The revelation left Richard speechless. In 15 years working there, Margaret had never mentioned that she spoke other languages. She had always been a discreet, efficient employee, but she had never shown signs of having this ability. You speak Arabic?" he asked, incredulous. "A little," she replied modestly, though she knew she had perfect command of the language. Karim continued speaking on the other end of the line, now clearly saying goodbye. Richard looked at Margaret with the expression of a drowning man who had found a life raft. "Margaret, please, would it be possible?" She hesitated for a moment. She knew that decision would change everything. For 15 years, she had kept her past life a secret, building a simple and secure existence as a janitor. But seeing the desperation in Richard's eyes, she couldn't refuse to help. "I can try," she said, reaching for the phone. Richard handed her the device as if it were a sacred relic. Margaret took a deep breath and brought the receiver to her ear, Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid Karim, she said in perfect Arabic, her voice calm and professional. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate. Then Karim's voice returned, but now with a completely different tone, surprised and interested. Wa alaikum assalam. Men anti? He asked, wanting to know who she was. Ana Margaret Wilson, A'mal fi hadi al-sharika mundu khamsat ashar aman, she replied, explaining that she had worked at the company for 15 years. Richard stood frozen, watching this unbelievable transformation. The same woman he saw every day mopping the floor of his office was now speaking fluently in Arabic with one of the richest men in the Middle East. Karim, on the other end of the line, seemed equally surprised and interested. He began asking questions about the company, about the project, and Margaret answered with a naturalness that made it clear she not only spoke the language, but had a deep understanding of business. Ana afham ana hunaka su'fam hawla al-mashru, she said, explaining that there was a misunderstanding about the project. For the next 20 minutes, Margaret served as an interpreter, but not just translating words. She explained each side's viewpoints, clarified technical issues that had become confused in the language barrier, and gradually managed to bring the two parties closer together. Richard watched fascinated as this woman, whom he had always considered just a dedicated employee, demonstrated a deep knowledge of business terms, real estate law, and even cultural aspects that helped in the negotiation. Karim is interested in the project, Margaret translated for Richard, but he has some concerns about the deadlines and the legal documentation. What kind of concerns? Asked Richard, still somewhat stunned by the situation. Margaret spoke again in Arabic with Karim, and then translated, he wants guarantees that all permits will be ready before he transfers the money. He also wants to better understand the exact location of the project. Richard began to explain the details, and Margaret translated everything with impressive accuracy. But something strange began to happen. When Karim asked more specific questions about the land where the complex would be built, Margaret hesitated a bit before translating. What is it? Asked Richard, noticing the pause. Nothing, it's just that Karim wants to know about the neighborhood where the land is located. About the families who live there, she said, her voice becoming a bit more tense. Oh, that. Well, some families will have to be relocated, but that's normal in this type of project, replied Richard, not noticing the change in Margaret's expression. She translated the answer, but Karim didn't seem satisfied. He asked more questions about the relocation process, about the compensations, about what would happen to the people who had lived there for decades. Margaret found herself in a terrible dilemma. The property that Karim and Richard were discussing was located in the Hope Heights neighborhood, exactly where she had lived for 15 years. Her small house, where she had raised her two daughters alone after her husband abandoned them, was right in the center of the area that would be demolished to make way for the commercial complex. Karim wants details about the families, she said to Richard, her voice betraying some of the tension she felt. Margaret, are you all right? Asked Richard, noticing her change in demeanor. Yes, sir. It's a delicate matter. Karim, who had noticed the hesitation in Margaret's voice, began asking her more direct questions. He wanted to know if she was familiar with the area, if she knew how the families were reacting to the project. Margaret took a deep breath. She knew she was at a crossroads. She could continue just translating and help Richard close the deal, or she could be honest about her own situation. Mr. Richard, she said, covering the phone's microphone, I need to tell you something. What is it? I live in the neighborhood where you want to build the complex. The impact of the revelation left Richard momentarily speechless. Margaret continued. My house is on Blossom Street, number 47, right in the center of the property you bought. Richard felt as if the ground had opened up beneath his feet. All these years, Margaret had worked for him without ever mentioning that she would be directly affected by the company's projects. And now she was there, helping him close a deal that would result in the loss of her own home. Margaret, I didn't know. Why did you never tell me? Because my job here is to clean and organize, Mr. Richard. I didn't think it was important. Karim was still talking on the other end of the line, asking what was happening. Margaret spoke to him again in Arabic, explaining that they needed a few minutes to clarify some points. "Margaret," said Richard, rising from his chair, "I cannot let you help me if it means you will lose your home. It's not fair." "Mr. Richard, perhaps we can find a solution that works for everyone," she said, her voice revealing a strength Richard had never noticed before. "How so?" "Karim is a businessman, but he is also someone who values justice. If we explain the situation properly, perhaps we can include a fairer relocation plan in the agreement." Richard was impressed by Margaret's maturity and wisdom. Even in a situation that could directly harm her, she was thinking of a solution that would benefit everyone. "Would you do that? Continue helping me even knowing your home is at stake?" "Mr. Richard, in 15 years working here, I've learned one important thing. Problems only get solved when people talk honestly. And now Karim is waiting for an answer." She returned to the phone and explained the entire situation to Karim. She told him she lived in the neighborhood, that she knew the families who would be affected, and that she would like to propose some changes to the project that could benefit everyone. Karim's reaction was surprising. Instead of getting angry, he became interested. He said he respected Margaret's honesty and wanted to hear her suggestions. Over the next hour, the three of them developed a completely new plan. Instead of simply demolishing everything and relocating the families to distant neighborhoods, the project would include the construction of a modern housing complex on part of the land where the families from Hope Heights could live with dignity. Karim was excited about the idea. He explained that in Kuwait, many projects included social responsibility and that this would give his company a very positive image in the United States. Richard, in turn, realized that the new plan, although more complex, would actually increase the project's value and attract more investors. The complex would become a model of sustainable development. "Karim wants to know if you have experience in urban planning," Margaret translated for Richard. "Why does he want to know that?" Margaret hesitated before answering. "Because he was impressed with the ideas I presented. He wants to know what my background is." "And what is it?" asked Richard, realizing there was much more to Margaret than he had ever imagined. "I'm an architect, Mr. Richard. Graduated from Columbia University in 1988. The revelation was like an electric shock to Richard. For 15 years, a trained architect had worked as a janitor in his company, and he had never known. Margaret, "But why did you never tell me? Why work as a janitor if you're an architect?" "It's a long story, Mr. Richard. Perhaps it's better if we talk about it later. Karim is waiting." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Karim, when he learned about Margaret's background, made an unexpected proposal. He wanted her to be the coordinator of the housing project within the complex. He said he trusted a person who knew the real needs of the community more than an outside consultant. Richard was in a difficult position. How could he promote his janitor to coordinator of a $258 million project? What would his other employees say? What would his son Jeffrey, who worked in the company and always had an arrogant attitude toward lower-ranking employees, say? Karim is offering a salary of $15,000 a month for Margaret to coordinate the housing part, she translated herself, her voice betraying a bit of nervousness. 15,000. Richard almost fell out of his chair. It was 3 times more than he paid some of his engineers. He said it's the standard salary for that type of position in his companies. Richard looked at Margaret and saw a woman completely different from the one he had known all these years, not just because of her language skills or the revelation about her background, but because of her posture, her confidence, the way she had conducted that impossible negotiation. "Margaret, I need to know. Why did you hide all these years? Why did a trained architect choose to work as a janitor?" She sighed deeply before answering. "Mr. Richard, there are things in life that are more complicated than they seem. When I graduated, the United States was coming out of a very difficult period. There weren't many opportunities for women architects, especially for single women with young daughters. But 15 years, Margaret. After a while, when I finally got an opportunity at an architecture firm, I discovered the owner expected much more from me than just professional work. When I refused, I was fired, and he made sure to spread lies about me in the industry. No one else wanted to hire me. The explanation left Richard outraged. He knew stories like that, knew many talented women had been harmed by unscrupulous men. And how did you end up here? Your wife, Mrs. Catherine, met me at a very difficult time in my life. I was cleaning houses to pay the rent and support my daughters. She offered me the job here and never asked questions about my past. She always treated me with respect and dignity. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Catherine had never mentioned anything about this, but he knew his wife had a generous heart and always helped people in trouble. Karim, on the other end of the line, was getting impatient, waiting for an answer. Margaret started speaking with him again, explaining they needed a few minutes to sort out the contractual issues. "Mr. Richard," she said, "Karim needs an answer by the end of the day. He wants to know if you accept his conditions, the housing project included in the complex, me as the coordinator of that part, and the total investment of $258 million. Richard stood up and walked to the window of his office. Down below he could see the movement of the city, people rushing back and forth, each with their own stories, their own dreams, their own struggles. He thought of Margaret, who for 15 years had hidden her true ability for fear of being rejected again. "Margaret, may I ask a personal question?" "Of course, Mr. Richard." "Were you resentful of me all these years, for not recognizing your potential?" Margaret smiled for the first time during that entire tense morning. "Mr. Richard, you always treated me with respect. You were never rude, you never made me feel inferior. For me, that was already much more than I received in other places. Besides, this work gave me the stability I needed to raise my daughters." "And your daughters? What do they do today?" "Sarah is a civil engineer. She works at a construction company here in New York City. Emily is a doctor. She finished her residency last year and works at a public hospital." Richard was impressed. Margaret had raised 2 successful professionals while working as a janitor, without ever mentioning the difficulties she faced. "Do they know about your background in architecture?" "Yes, they do. In fact, it was Sarah who encouraged me to go back to studying. I took some refresher courses in recent years, mainly about sustainability and social responsibility in urban projects." This revelation gave Richard the certainty that Margaret was exactly the right person to coordinate that project. She had the technical training, the life experience, and most importantly, the necessary sensitivity to deal with the families who would be affected. "Margaret, I accept Karim's proposal, but I want to make one additional condition." "What is it, Mr. Richard?" "I want you to be more than just the coordinator of the housing project. I want you to be my partner in this project. I want to create a new department in the company for social responsibility, and I want you to be the director." Margaret was silent for a few seconds, processing the proposal. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, but also an enormous responsibility. "Mr. Richard, that is very generous, but—" "No buts, Margaret. You saved my company today. More than that, you taught me an important lesson about not judging people by their appearance or the position they hold." Karim interrupted the conversation with an urgent question. He wanted to know if they had reached an agreement, as he had an important meeting in an hour. Margaret looked at Richard, who nodded positively. "Karim," she said in Arabic, "we have an agreement. Mr. Richard accepts all your conditions, including my participation in the project." Karim's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He said he would email the contracts that very afternoon and that he would like to meet Margaret in person when he came to the United States the following month. When they finally hung up the phone, Richard and Margaret were silent for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened on that extraordinary morning. "Margaret, may I ask one more question?" "Of course." "How did you learn Arabic? It's not exactly a common language around here." Margaret hesitated again. Richard sensed there were even more layers to that story. "My first husband was Jordanian. We met in college. He came to the United States to study engineering, and I learned Arabic to be able to talk to his family." "And what happened to him?" "When the girls were born, he decided he wasn't ready to be a father. He went back to Jordan and we never heard from him again." Richard felt a pang of anger. Once again, Margaret had been abandoned by a man who should have supported her. "Margaret, Mr. Richard, Please don't feel bad for me. These experiences made me stronger, and they taught me to value people like you and Mrs. Catherine, who gave me an opportunity when I needed it most." At that moment, the office door swung open abruptly, and Jeffrey, Richard's son, entered without knocking. "Dad, I need to talk to you about—" He stopped abruptly upon seeing Margaret seated in the client chair across from his father's desk. "Jeffrey, could you knock before entering?" said Richard, slightly annoyed by the interruption. "Sorry, Dad, but—" Jeffrey looked at Margaret with a poorly disguised expression of contempt. "Why is the janitor sitting there?" Richard felt his blood boil. Jeffrey had always had an arrogant attitude toward the staff, but now, after everything he had witnessed, that behavior seemed unbearable to him. "Jeffrey, I'd like you to meet Margaret Wilson, our new Director of Social Responsibility." The 28-year-old young man was dumbfounded. "Director? Dad, are you joking with me?" "I'm very serious. Margaret just helped us close the deal with Karim Al-Fayez. A $258 million deal. That's impossible. You've been trying to close that deal for weeks. It was impossible until Margaret started speaking fluent Arabic with Karim and presented a social responsibility project that deeply impressed him." Jeffrey looked at Margaret as if he was seeing a ghost. "You speak Arabic?" "Yes, I do," she replied calmly. But you're a janitor." "No, Jeffrey," said Richard, his voice growing firmer. "Margaret is an architect who graduated from Columbia, mother of a civil engineer and a doctor, and as of today, director of this company." The impact of the revelation left Jeffrey stunned. For years, he had treated Margaret as an inferior employee, barely greeting her when he passed her in the halls. I didn't know," he stammered. "You didn't know because you never bothered to get to know the people who work here," said Richard, his patience wearing thin. "You've always judged everyone by their appearance or their position." Margaret, seeing the tension between father and son, decided to intervene. "Jeffrey, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with not knowing. I never talked about my background because I didn't think it was necessary." "But why? Why hide like that?" "Because sometimes life forces us to make choices that aren't ideal, but are necessary to survive and take care of those we love." Jeffrey fell silent, processing Margaret's words. For the first time in his life, he was being confronted with the reality that talented and qualified people often hold positions that don't reflect their true potential due to circumstances beyond their control. "Margaret," he finally said, I apologize. I know I haven't always been respectful toward you." "Jeffrey, you were never disrespectful. Perhaps just distant, but that's normal in a large company." "No, it's not normal," said Richard. "And that changes starting today. I want you to work directly with Margaret on the housing complex project." "Dad, I don't know anything about social responsibility." "Then it's time to learn," Richard said firmly. "Margaret will be your mentor in this area." Margaret looked at Jeffrey with a maternal expression the young man had never seen directed at him. "Jeffrey, it will be a pleasure to work with you. I'm sure you have a lot to contribute to this project." For the rest of the afternoon, Richard, Margaret, and Jeffrey worked together on the project details. Margaret showed maps of the Hope Heights neighborhood, explained the needs of the families living there, and presented innovative ideas for integrating the housing complex with the commercial center. Jeffrey, initially hesitant, began to engage more and more in the discussions. His background in business administration brought an important perspective on the economic viability of Margaret's proposals. "Margaret," he said during a pause, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." "How did you manage to keep hope all these years? How did you not become bitter with everything you went through?" Margaret smiled, looking out the window at the city below. "Jeffrey, I learned that bitterness is a luxury I couldn't afford. I had 2 daughters to raise, and they needed a strong mother, not a victim. Besides, I always believed that if I did my best, regardless of the role I was performing, opportunities would appear." "And they did," said Richard, looking at her with admiration. "They did, because you had open minds to see beyond appearances," she replied. At that moment, the phone rang again. It was Karim, calling to confirm some contract details. Margaret answered and spoke with him for a few minutes in Arabic. When she hung up, she had a surprised expression on her face. "What is it?" asked Richard. Karim wants me to go to Kuwait next month to see some similar projects his company has developed there. He wants me to bring back ideas that can be adapted for our project here in the United States. That's fantastic, exclaimed Jeffrey. An international trip on your very first day as director. Margaret laughed, but Richard noticed something was bothering her. Margaret, what's the matter? It's not exactly a problem, it's just that I've never traveled outside the United States. In fact, I've never even traveled outside New York City. Then it will be an amazing experience for you, said Richard. Mr. Harrison, Karim also asked for you to come along. He wants you both to meet other investors who might be interested in similar projects in the United States. Richard was excited by the possibility. This business was turning into something much bigger than he had imagined. And me? Asked Jeffrey with a hopeful expression. Karim said you can come too if you want. He thinks it's important to involve the next generation of the company in these projects. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. During the following weeks, Margaret's life changed completely. She moved from Hope Heights to an apartment closer to the office, but not before organizing meetings with all the families in the neighborhood to explain the project and hear their concerns. The process wasn't easy. Many families were suspicious, thinking it was just another empty promise from politicians or business people. But Margaret had one advantage. She was one of them. She lived there. She knew their struggles, their hopes, their fears. Mrs. Thompson, she said to a 70-year-old neighbor who was particularly resistant to the project, I understand your concern. I've lived here for 15 years. I raised my daughters in this community. I would never accept a project that would harm our people. But Margaret, replied Mrs. Thompson, you're on their side now. How can I be sure you won't forget where you came from? Because I'm going to keep living here, Mrs. Thompson, in the new housing complex. My home will be the first one built, and I'll live there until the project is completely finished. This decision by Margaret impressed everyone, including Richard. She was literally putting her life where her word was. The meetings with the community revealed needs that hadn't been considered initially. Daycare for the children, a health center, a recreation area for the elderly, spaces for small businesses that would allow families to maintain their sources of income. Margaret incorporated all these demands into the project, always consulting with Karim before making changes. To Richard's surprise, the Arab investor not only approved all the changes, but increased the investment to $300 million. Karim said projects like this, which truly transform communities, are highly valued in the Middle East, explained Margaret after one of their phone calls. He's thinking of using this project as a model for other investments in Latin America. The preparations for the trip to Kuwait brought new challenges and revelations. When Margaret went to get her passport, she discovered she needed some documents she had lost during one of her many moves over the years. It was Catherine, Richard's wife, who helped her sort out these bureaucratic issues. And it was during one of these conversations that Catherine revealed something that left Margaret deeply moved. Margaret, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course, Mrs. Catherine. When I offered you the job 15 years ago, I knew you were an architect. Margaret was stunned. What do you mean? You were cleaning my sister's house, and she had left some of your old drawings spread out on the table. They were beautiful, very professional projects. I asked my sister who had drawn them, and she told me your story. And why did you never say anything? Because I realized you didn't want to talk about it. I respected your choice to start over. But I always knew that one day your true abilities would come to light. Margaret hugged Catherine with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Catherine, you changed my life. If it weren't for that opportunity, I wouldn't have been able to raise my daughters with dignity. Margaret, you don't need to thank me. You were always an exemplary employee, a person of integrity, a dedicated mother. I'm the one who should be thankful for having you in our family all these years. The trip to Kuwait was a transformative experience for everyone involved. Margaret was impressed by the sustainable development projects she saw there, especially how they managed to integrate tradition and modernity. Karim personally welcomed them at Kuwait City Airport, and during the 5 days they spent there, he showed them not only housing projects but also schools, community centers, and even microcredit initiatives for small business owners. Margaret, Karim said during one visit, you have a very clear vision of what your community needs. That's rare among outside consultants. Karim, I'm not just a consultant, I am part of the community. That makes all the difference. That's exactly why I want to propose something to you. Karim took them to his main office, a modern building overlooking the Persian Gulf. I want to create a long-term partnership with your company, not just for this project in New York City, but to develop similar projects in other US cities. Richard was speechless. It was a proposal that surpassed his wildest dreams. What would the total investment be? He asked. We're talking about $1 billion over the next 5 years. Jeffrey, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. Karim, this would mean completely transforming our company. We'd have to hire dozens of people, open offices in other cities. Exactly, replied Karim. And I want Margaret to be the overall coordinator for all these projects. The proposal was tempting, but also daunting. It meant an enormous responsibility for Margaret, who just a few months earlier was just a janitor. During the flight back to the United States, the three of them talked at length about the implications of Karim's proposal. Margaret, said Richard, do you feel prepared for a responsibility of this magnitude? Honestly, Mr. Richard, I feel prepared because I won't be doing it alone. We have a good team, and more importantly, we have a just cause. When you work to improve people's lives, you find strength you never knew you had. What about you, Jeffrey? Asked Richard to his son. Dad, I learned so much on this trip. I learned there are ways of doing business that go far beyond profit. If we accept this proposal, we won't just be building buildings, we'll be building hope. Back in the United States, news about the project began to spread. Local papers ran stories about the janitor who became director and the innovative project that combined real estate development with social responsibility. Margaret found herself in a completely new situation, giving interviews, participating in seminars on urban sustainability, representing the company at real estate industry events. In one such interview, the journalist asked, Margaret, what was the hardest moment these past few months? It was when I had to convince my own community that the project was serious. They were right to be suspicious. They'd been let down many times by empty promises. Winning their trust was harder than learning to negotiate with international investors. And what was the most rewarding moment? It was when Mrs. Thompson, a 70-year-old neighbor who had been very resistant to the project, came to tell me she'd changed her mind. She said, Margaret, if you're involved, I trust you. In that moment, I understood the responsibility I was taking on. The project in Hope Heights began to take shape 6 months after the first phone call with Karim. The first stage was building temporary housing for the families whose homes would be demolished. Margaret made sure to personally accompany each family during the moving process. She knew all the children's names, knew which elderly residents had health problems, understood the concerns of every single mother. Mrs. Parker, she told one woman who was particularly nervous about the move, you're going to like the new house. It has 2 bedrooms instead of 1, and the kitchen is bigger. Your granddaughter will have a better place to study. Margaret, my dear, replied Mrs. Parker, I trust you. But I'm afraid that when everything's ready, they'll say it's not for people like us anymore. Mrs. Parker, I have the contract right here in my bag. Your name is registered as the owner of one of the housing units. No one can take that from you. These conversations happened daily. Margaret discovered that the most challenging part of the project wasn't the technical or financial issues, but rather the emotional work of rebuilding trust among people who had been disappointed many times. Richard watched Margaret's work with growing admiration. She had a unique ability to be in meetings with millionaire investors in the morning and talk with low-income families in the afternoon, maintaining the same authenticity and competence in both situations. Jeffrey, Richard said one afternoon, do you see what Margaret is doing there? I do, Dad. It's impressive. She's teaching me what it really means to be a business person. It's not just about profit or growth. It's about impact, about leaving the world a little better than you found it. Dad, can I tell you something? Of course. Before I got to know Margaret better, I thought people like her were failures, that if they were truly competent, they'd be in better positions. Now I understand how wrong I was. How so? Margaret wasn't in a lower position because she was incompetent. She was there because society didn't give her proper opportunities. And even so, she never lost her dignity, never stopped improving herself, never gave up on her dreams. And what does that teach you? That there are many talented people in positions that don't reflect their potential. Our responsibility as employers is to create opportunities for these people to shine. This conversation marked an important shift in the company culture. Richard and Jeffrey began implementing internal development policies, offering training courses for all employees, regardless of their position. Mrs. Thompson, who had worked at the reception desk for 10 years, revealed she had a background in accounting and was promoted to the finance department. Brandon, from the maintenance department, showed interest and aptitude for project management and began working directly with construction companies. "Margaret," said Richard during a meeting, "you didn't just transform a real estate project, you transformed our entire company." "Mr. Richard, I only did what I've always known how to do. Treat people with respect and believe in their potential." The first building of the housing complex was completed in 8 months. It was a 4-story building with 2-bedroom apartments, a common area with a playground and garden, and ground floor spaces for small businesses. The inauguration was an emotional event. Karim came especially from Kuwait to attend, and Margaret invited all the families from the community, including those who hadn't moved in yet. "Friends," said Margaret in her inauguration speech, "this building represents more than new homes. It represents proof that when people of goodwill come together, it's possible to turn dreams into reality." Karim, in his speech, said something that surprised everyone. "You know, I've invested in many projects around the world, but this project in New York City taught me something new about urban development. I learned that true success isn't measured just in square meters built or financial return. It's measured in the smiles of children who now have a safe place to play, in the peace of mind of the elderly who know they won't be forgotten, in the hope of young people who see opportunities where before there were only limitations." Mrs. Parker, who had been one of the most resistant to the project, asked to speak. "I want to apologize to Margaret. I doubted her at first. I thought she had forgotten where she came from, but now I see she never forgot. She just became stronger, more capable of helping us. Margaret, you are our heroine." Mrs. Parker's speech moved everyone, especially Margaret, who had to pause for a few seconds to hold back tears. In the following months, the project continued to grow. The commercial complex began to take shape, and with it job opportunities for the community residents. Margaret made sure that at least 30% of the positions were filled by people from Hope Heights itself. Emily, Margaret's daughter, the doctor, decided to open a small practice on the ground floor of the housing complex, offering care at affordable prices for the community. Sarah, the engineer, managed to get a transfer to Richard's company and began working directly on social responsibility projects. "Mom," said Sarah during a family lunch, "I always knew you were special, but only now do I understand the extent of your strength." "What do you mean, dear? You spent 15 years working as a janitor, raised 2 daughters alone, never complained, never played the victim. And when your opportunity came, you were prepared. That is extraordinary." "Sarah, I always believed that if I did my best in any role, opportunities would appear. Maybe they took longer than I would have liked, but they appeared. And now? What do you feel when you look back?" "Gratitude, dear. Gratitude for having had the strength to get through the difficulties, for having found good people on my path, and most of all, for having you 2 as daughters." The success of the project in New York City attracted the attention of other investors and municipal governments from different cities. Margaret began receiving invitations to speak at universities, architecture seminars, and urban development conferences. At one such lecture at a university in Washington, D.C., a student asked, "Professor Margaret, what advice would you give to young architects just starting their careers?" "First, never underestimate the value of deeply understanding the needs of the people you're designing for. Second, don't be afraid to start small. Sometimes the best projects are born from the simplest situations. And third, always remember that architecture isn't just about building beautiful structures. It's about building communities, about improving people's lives, and for people facing difficulties in their careers. Never stop improving yourself, even if you don't see immediate opportunities. I took refresher courses for years, even while working as a janitor. When the opportunity came, I was prepared, and more importantly, maintain your dignity, regardless of your position. Honest work, any honest work, is noble. 2 years after that first phone call, Richard's company had completely transformed. From a traditional construction company focused solely on profit, it had become a reference in sustainable urban development. Karim fulfilled his investment promise, and new projects were initiated in 5 U.S. cities: Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Philadelphia, and Boston. Margaret coordinated them all, traveling constantly, but always maintaining her home in the Hope Heights housing complex. "Margaret," Richard said during a company board meeting, "Karim has made a new proposal." "What does he want now?" "He wants you to open an office in Kuwait to coordinate similar projects in the Middle East and Africa." "Would that mean moving there?" "For at least 2 years, yes." Margaret fell silent, considering the proposal. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would also mean leaving the United States, her community, her family. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Margaret, you know Karim is right. You've developed a unique methodology for participatory urban development. Other communities around the world could benefit from your experience." That evening, Margaret talked at length with her daughters about the proposal. "Mom," said Emily, "you always taught us that when we have the opportunity to help people, we should take it. But that would mean being away from you." "Mom," said Sarah, "you've already set an example here in the United States. Other people can continue your work here while you spread these ideas around the world." "Do you really think I should accept?" "Mom," said Emily, "you spent 15 years putting our needs first. Now it's time for you to think about your own growth." "Besides," Sarah added, 2 years go by quickly, and you can come back to visit us whenever you want." The decision wasn't easy, but Margaret ultimately accepted Karim's proposal. Before traveling, she organized a big farewell party at Hope Heights, inviting all the families who had participated in the project. "Friends," she said in her farewell speech, "you know this community will always be my home. No matter where I am in the world, my heart will always be here, with you." Mrs. Thompson, now 72 years old, asked to speak again. "Margaret, when you left here as a janitor and returned as a director, I thought you had changed sides. Now I understand you never changed sides. You just grew stronger to be able to help us better. Go in peace, my child. Take our example to the world and show everyone that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when given opportunities." JFK Airport was crowded on the morning of Margaret's departure. Richard, Catherine, Jeffrey, Sarah, and Emily came to say goodbye. Karim was also there, accompanied by a small team that would work with Margaret in Kuwait. "Margaret," said Richard, "you know you'll always have a place here at the company, right?" "Yes, I do, Mr. Richard. And you know you'll always be part of my family, right?" Richard hugged Margaret with fatherly affection. "Margaret, you transformed not just our company, but our lives. You taught me that true success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by the positive impact we have on other people's lives." On the plane during the long flight to Kuwait City, Margaret reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived over the past 2 years, from janitor to international director of urban development, from invisible woman to world reference in social projects. But what moved her most wasn't the titles or recognition. It was knowing that hundreds of families now had decent homes, that dozens of young people had found jobs, that several communities had been transformed. Karim, who was on the same flight, sat beside her. "Margaret, may I tell you why I really wanted to work with you?" "Of course. When you started speaking Arabic with me that first day, it wasn't just the language that impressed me. It was the honesty in your voice. You told me you lived in the neighborhood that would be affected by the project. How many consultants would do that? Probably none." "Exactly. And later, when you proposed including the families in the project instead of simply relocating them, I understood I had found someone truly special, someone who understood that urban development isn't about building buildings, but about building communities." "Karim, may I ask you a question?" "Of course." Why do you invest so much in social projects? You could make much more money with purely commercial ventures." Karim smiled and looked out the airplane window. "Margaret, I grew up in a very poor family in Kuwait. My father was a fisherman, and we lived in a very simple house by the sea. When oil was discovered and the country began to develop, our family was one of those that benefited from the government housing programs." "I understand. I studied in a public school, graduated from a public university, and had opportunities my parents never dreamed of. Now that I have financial means, I feel it's my obligation to create the same opportunities for other people." "That's exactly what motivates me too," said Margaret. "The feeling that we can be instruments of transformation in people's lives." The work in Kuwait was even more challenging than Margaret had imagined. She coordinated projects in 3 different countries: Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and Morocco. Each location had its cultural particularities, its specific challenges, its unique needs. But the methodology she had developed in the United States proved effective, getting to know the community deeply, involving residents in decisions, creating solutions that respect local culture and guarantee dignity for all. The most remarkable project was in Casablanca, Morocco, where she worked with a community of traditional artisans who were being threatened by uncontrolled urban growth. Margaret proposed creating a cultural center that would preserve artisanal traditions while providing decent housing for the families. "Margaret," said Layla, a 60-year-old Moroccan artisan, "you understand our culture better than many consultants who were born here." "Layla, perhaps it's because I also live the experience of being a woman, of having to fight for opportunities, of wanting to preserve traditions while seeking progress." The success of the projects in the Middle East and Africa led Margaret to be invited to give lectures in Europe and the United States. Prestigious universities wanted to study her methodology. International organizations requested consulting services. Governments sought advisory support for their housing programs. But after 2 years, Margaret felt homesick for the United States, her family, and Hope Heights. During a video call with her daughters, she said, "Girls, I'm thinking about coming back." "Mom," said Sarah, "are you sure? The opportunities there are incredible." "I'm sure. I've learned so much here, experienced wonderful cultures, developed important projects. But my heart is in the United States." "And what do you plan to do when you return?" asked Emily. "I want to create a school of participatory urban development. I want to teach young architects and urban planners the methodology we developed. I want other communities in the United States to benefit from these experiences." Karim, upon learning of Margaret's decision, made a surprising proposal. "Margaret, what if we created an international foundation? You would coordinate activities in the United States, and I would finance projects in other countries based on your methodology. Like a worldwide network for participatory urban development." "Exactly. Communities around the world could benefit from what you've developed." The idea was tempting and made perfect sense. Margaret accepted the proposal, but with one condition: the foundation's US headquarters would be in Hope Heights, in the very neighborhood where it all began. Margaret's return to the United States was celebrated like that of a local hero. JFK Airport was full of journalists, but also people from Hope Heights who made sure to be there to welcome her. Mrs. Thompson, now 74 years old, was in the front row, holding a sign that read, "Welcome back, our global ambassador." "Mrs. Thompson," said Margaret, hugging the woman affectionately, "how are things around here?" "Margaret, dear, everything is wonderful. The housing complex looks beautiful. The children are studying in the new school, and your daughter Emily's health center is always busy." "And how are the families?" "Proud, Margaret, very proud. Everyone here has followed your achievements around the world. We know you've taken our name to places we never dreamed of knowing." The headquarters of the Margaret Wilson Foundation for Participatory Urban Development was inaugurated 6 months later in a building specially constructed for this purpose in Hope Heights. It was a modern place that respected the local architecture and included community spaces for the residents. At the inauguration, Richard gave an emotional speech. "3 years ago, I thought I knew the meaning of the word success. I thought success was having money, power, recognition. Margaret taught me that true success is the ability to transform lives, to create opportunities, to leave the world better than we found it. Jeffrey, who now directed the social responsibility projects for his father's company, also spoke. Margaret taught me that leadership has nothing to do with hierarchical position. It's about the ability to inspire, to unite people around common goals, to get everyone to give their best. Karim, who came specially from Kuwait for the inauguration, announced that the foundation would receive an initial investment of $50 million to develop projects in 20 US cities over the next 5 years. Margaret, he said, you've proven that it's possible to do urban development in an ethical, sustainable, and participatory way. Now, we want to multiply this model across the entire United States. During the ceremony, Margaret announced that the first class of the School of Participatory Urban Development would begin in 3 months, with 40 free spots for young people from low-income communities interested in architecture and urban planning. I want to give other young people the opportunities I didn't have when I was younger, she said. I want people from all social backgrounds to be able to study, qualify themselves, and contribute to the development of their own communities. Sarah and Emily, who had followed their mother's entire journey, were put in charge of different aspects of the foundation. Sarah would coordinate the technical projects, while Emily would handle the social and community health aspects. Mom, said Sarah during the inauguration dinner, you've achieved something few people do in life. What is it, dear? You turned your pain into purpose, your difficulties into wisdom, and your experience into opportunities for other people. Sarah, I only did what any mother would do. I fought to give the best to my daughters and to my community. No, Mom, said Emily, you did much more than that. You proved that it doesn't matter where we come from or what position we start in. What matters is our determination to grow, to learn, to contribute. In the following months, the School of Participatory Urban Development began operating. The first 40 students came from low-income communities throughout the New York City metropolitan area. Among them was Brandon, a 19-year-old young man from Hope Heights itself, the son of Mrs. Parker, one of the first residents to benefit from the project. Professor Margaret, said Brandon on the first day of class, my mother always told me that you are proof that we can get wherever we want, no matter where we start. Brandon, your mother is right, but remember, the path isn't easy. It will require a lot of studying, a lot of dedication, a lot of persistence. Professor, if you managed it, I can too. Not only can you, but you will. And when you do, remember to help other young people who are in the same situation you are in today. The students' first project was a community center for Hope Heights, designed collectively by them under Margaret's guidance. It was a simple but functional building, which included a library, a computer room, a meeting space, and a small arena for cultural presentations. Brandon, said Margaret during the project presentation, do you see the difference between designing for a community and designing with a community? Yes, Professor. When we design with the community, the result reflects the people's real needs, not just our outside view of what they need. Exactly. And that makes all the difference between a project that works and one that just looks good on paper. 3 years after Margaret's return to the United States, the foundation had already developed projects in 15 cities. Each project followed the basic principles: community participation, environmental sustainability, economic viability, and respect for local culture. The impact went far beyond the numbers. Hundreds of families had obtained decent housing, dozens of young people had gained professional qualifications, and several communities had organized themselves to solve their own problems. In an interview for national television, the journalist asked Margaret, "What do you consider the greatest success of this entire process?" The greatest success isn't the buildings we constructed or the awards we won. The greatest success is seeing people who once felt invisible now believing in their own potential. Could you give a specific example? I have several, but I'll talk about Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor in Hope Heights. When the project began, she was afraid of change. She thought she didn't deserve anything better. Today, at 76 years old, she coordinates a group of seniors that gives talks about sustainability in public schools. She discovered she had a lot of knowledge to share. And personally, how do you feel when you look back to that morning 6 years ago when you answered that phone in Richard's office? I feel grateful. I am grateful for having had the courage to speak up, for Richard having had the humility to accept help, for Karim having had the vision to bet on a different project, and most of all, I am grateful for having learned that it is never too late to start over, never too late to grow. What advice would you give to people who feel stuck in situations that don't reflect their potential? First, never stop improving yourselves, even if you don't see immediate opportunities. Second, maintain your dignity in any role you perform. Third, be honest and generous with the people around you. Opportunities come when we least expect them, and we need to be ready for them. At the end of 2024, Margaret received an unexpected call. It was the mayor of New York City wanting to invite her to coordinate a municipal affordable housing program. Margaret, we want to implement your methodology on a municipal scale. It would be a program to serve 50,000 families over the next 4 years. The proposal was tempting, but Margaret asked for some time to think. That night, she talked with Sarah and Emily about the possibility. "Mom," said Sarah, "it's an opportunity to impact even more lives." "But it would also be a huge responsibility," replied Margaret. "Mom," said Emily, "you always taught us that when we have the ability to help, we also have the responsibility to do so." "Do you think I should accept?" "We think you should do what your heart tells you," said Sarah. "But remember that 6 years ago you were a janitor nobody noticed. Today you are a world reference in urban development. If you manage that transformation, imagine what you can do for other people." Margaret decided to accept the invitation, but with conditions. The program would be developed in partnership with the foundation. The projects would always be participatory, and at least 50% of the jobs created had to be filled by residents from the very communities being helped. The signing of the agreement took place in Hope Heights, in the very same place where Margaret had lived as a janitor. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. "Friends," she said in her signing speech, "this program represents more than houses for 50,000 families. It represents proof that when people from different backgrounds and social positions come together around common goals, it is possible to transform reality." Karim, who remained the foundation's main international funder, sent a video message that was played during the ceremony. "Margaret, when we first spoke 6 years ago, I was looking for a piece of land to invest in. I ended up finding much more than that. I found a partner, a friend, and most importantly, I found inspiration to do business in a more human and fair way." Richard, now 58 with graying hair, also gave a moving speech. "6 years ago, I thought I was a successful businessman. I had money, I had recognition in the real estate sector, I had a thriving company. But I was losing the most important deal of my life because I couldn't communicate properly. Margaret didn't just save that deal. She taught me a new way to understand success, a new way to do business, a new way to relate to people." Jeffrey, who now managed a large part of his father's company's projects, added, "Margaret taught me that true leadership doesn't come from the position we hold, but from our ability to serve others, to create opportunities, to inspire people to give their best." During the following years, the Municipal Participatory Housing Program became a model for other US cities and even for other countries in Latin America. Delegations from Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile came to study the methodology developed by Margaret. In 2027, 10 years after that first phone call, Margaret was invited to a UN conference on sustainable urban development. It was the highest international recognition for her work. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in her speech to the representatives of 195 countries, "I would like to begin by telling a story. 10 years ago, I was a janitor in New York City. No one asked my opinion about anything. No one imagined I could have important ideas. No one suspected I mastered different languages or had a college degree." The audience fell silent, attentive to every word. One day, my boss was having difficulty communicating with an Arab investor, and I offered help. That moment changed my life, but most importantly, it changed my understanding of human potential. I learned that in every community, in every neighborhood, in every slum, there are people with extraordinary talents who just need opportunities to shine. I learned that urban development isn't about building beautiful buildings for rich people. It's about creating opportunities so that all people, regardless of their background, can live with dignity. I learned that true sustainability isn't just environmental, it's social, it's economic, it's cultural. A project is only sustainable if the people who live in it feel like they own it, feel like they are part of it, feel proud of it. And I learned that urban transformation doesn't happen from the top down. It happens from the inside out, when the communities themselves become the protagonists of their development. Margaret's speech was interrupted several times by applause. At the end, she received a standing ovation from everyone present. After the conference, several countries invited her to develop similar projects in their cities. But Margaret, now 68 years old, decided it was time to train a new generation of professionals capable of multiplying that methodology. "Sarah," she said to her daughter, "the time has come for you to take over the leadership of the foundation." "Mom, you still have so much to contribute." "I do, but in a different way. I want to dedicate myself more to teaching, to training new professionals. I want you and Brandon and all the young people we've trained to take the lead. And you, what will you do?" "I will return to Hope Heights, to my home in the housing project. I will teach at the School of Urban Development. I will handle specific consultations. I will write a book about everything I've learned." "Are you sure?" "I am. I learned that true leadership is knowing when to pass the baton to the next generation." Margaret's partial retirement did not mean inactivity. At 70 years old, she launched the book From Janitor to Ambassador, a journey of urban and social transformation, which became a national bestseller and was translated into 12 languages. At the book presentation in Hope Heights, Mrs. Thompson, now 81 years old but still lucid and active, gave the opening remarks. "Friends, I want to tell you what our community was like before Margaret came into our lives. We had old houses, we had no health center, we had no decent school, we had no hope. Today I look around and I see dignified apartments. I see a school that is a reference in the region. I see a modern health center. I see young people from our own community graduating as architects and engineers. But most importantly, I see hope in the eyes of our children." Margaret didn't do this alone. She taught us that we ourselves could transform our reality. She taught us that our voice had value, that our ideas were important, that our dreams could come true. Brandon, now a graduated architect and professor at the School of Urban Development, also spoke at the presentation. "Professor Margaret taught me that being a professional isn't just about having a diploma. It's about having a commitment to people. It's about having social responsibility. It's understanding that our knowledge should serve to improve the lives of others." Sarah, who had taken over as the general director of the foundation, presented the numbers of the work carried out over 15 years. More than 100,000 families directly benefited, 500 young people trained by the School of Participatory Urban Development, 50 projects implemented in 28 United States cities and 12 countries. "But the numbers don't tell the whole story," she said. "What really matters are the transformed lives, the strengthened communities, the dreams fulfilled. My mother taught me that urban development isn't measured in square feet built, but in smiles earned, in renewed hopes, in restored dignity." End of story. So, what did you think of this incredible story of overcoming and transformation? Do you know someone like Margaret, who had her talent hidden by life's circumstances? How would you react if you discovered that someone close to you has extraordinary abilities they never revealed? Tell us your opinion about this emotional journey in the comments, and don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart.